Thomasina, you said that your family, was right in the midst of the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. What was it that happened for your family? Do you mind sharing that? That was the bump in the road that caused the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, do you think?
I would say, frankly, just a lack of awareness. I mean, I think in our society in general, people are so focused on accumulating wealth, of building the business, of working hard, providing for your family. For many people, is a question of financial resources. And, my grandparents, I live in Florida, in the area where my grandparents owned substantial land. They were citrus growers in an area not too far from Disney World. Okay. And accumulated quite a bit for a Black family in the South in the 30s. My grandmother purchased land in her own name in the 30s. And I don't know, sometimes they purchased land together, sometimes it was one, sometimes it was the other. I don't understand the history of it, but they were so focused on providing for their family. In the community in which I grew up, my cousins all lived, my uncles and aunts, because my grandparents had so much land that one of their key gifts for their kids for their weddings was to give them a plot of land for their new home. And so the whole community was my grandparents. My grandparents actually gave land to the city to what is to this day the only park in the Black part of town. It's a predominantly white community. And there was no park. So my grandparents provided a park so that kids other than their grandkids would have a place to play. They named the community after my grandparents. And again, very prominent, worked really hard. And my grandfather, I can remember being in high school and talking to my grandfather about estate planning. What do I know about estate planning? I'm a kid in high school. I didn't know anything about estate planning, but I knew intuitively, just because I was watching, there were going to be problems on a relationship level when my grandparents were no longer around. Right. And my grandfather, very traditionalist. The oldest child was a male. He's deceased today. May his soul rest in peace. And my grandfather's notion was that his job was to make as much money as possible to accumulate this vast array of resources to lay the foundation that would take care of his family for generations well beyond my generation. And that once he was no longer in the picture, the mantle would pass to my uncle, his oldest son, to play that role of patriarch, to make sure that everyone was provided, that they would get their equivalent, proverbially, of their plot of land as their foundation on which to build. Gotcha. Well, it didn't quite work out like that. And I couldn't, again, I'm a kid, I'm in high school. I couldn't convince my grandfather, and I had no knowledge of this world. Frankly, I had no knowledge of this world until a relatively few years ago. Right. And I think it's because people don't know that there's actually a profession, that there are resources, that there are structures and frameworks like understanding your family as an emotional system, that you need both that quantitative, the financial side, but just like when you're doing financial books, you always have the counterbalance. You need the financial assets, but you also have to pay attention to those family assets. You need to invest in your family the same way that you invest in growing your business and building your finances. Because if you don't, the consequences are going to be that over time, you're going to lose both. You're going to lose the family resources, and also those relationships are going to be damaged in the process. And that's something that nobody teaches us how to do. It's very difficult to navigate the family relationship side of the ledger. And because it's so challenging, most people either think, I find it's a spectrum. They either think, oh, I don't need to worry about that. My oldest son's going to take care of everybody because he knows that's what I want. And then you have people who say, well, I've tried everything. There's nothing that can be done. My family's incorrigible. And everybody in between. And I think it's just because people don't have the tools. They don't have the resources. They don't have guides to help them understand that there's plenty that you can do. It's a question, I think, of exposure a lot of times. And then, of course, in addition to exposure, there has to be a willingness. There's got to be a commitment to doing that work. Some people are just afraid to go there as it relates to relationships. But I think that's because they feel like a fish out of water, so to speak. They don't know what to do. And once they find out that there is a way forward, there at least is an interest in kind of dipping their toe in the water a little bit to explore. Because the reality is, most everybody who I know will say, I will do anything for my family. I had a client tell me just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, well, exactly. That's where the willingness comes in. They'll say, I'll do anything for my family. I had a client tell me just a couple of weeks ago, I would give up this business in a heartbeat if I knew it was going to tear my family apart. And then we get into the question about how do you avoid having the business tear your family apart? And people have to do some reflecting. You know, you've got to be willing to go there. You've got to be willing to be vulnerable, to look at yourself and your own role.
No, that's all good.